Nice to see you. My name is Nicholas Longton. I work for a company called Arcstone, and we're going to cover our bulletproof website redesign process today. Go ahead and fill out that poll if you'd like. It looks like we have some people with some fairly old websites, a few that existed back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. So that's good you're here then. You'll learn some very valuable stuff on updating that website. That's for sure. If you're interested in other webinars, we have a lot of other content. Some of it's on demand. You can go ahead and watch right now. Some of it's upcoming. We have an upcoming webinar on website accessibility, actually, which will be really cool. That's next month. So check out arczone.com/events for more webinar content and other kinds of content too. If you don't know what Arcstone is a full service digital agency, and we specialize in helping nonprofits. We do website redesigns, design, marketing, technology, website hosting, app development, a lot of content, virtual events, all kinds of things. So check us out if you're not familiar. Just some typical clients of ours to give you an idea. Minnesota Masonic Charities, an awesome local nonprofit that helps a lot of people. We've developed, I think, 4 or 5 websites for them now. We've redesigned kind of one of their core websites a few times now over the years. Big Brothers Big Sisters, we help them with their website redesign and branding. And Health Partners, which in our local market's a large nonprofit health insurance provider. We've developed a bunch of websites for them. So we're going to go over this website design process and why we created a process for this. We started developing and designing websites actually in the 90s, quite a while ago, and it was kind of the wild west of the internet at the time. And we saw the need to really make a solid bulletproof process that we could replicate for redesigning websites that would provide success repeatedly every time. We noticed when clients didn't want to follow a certain process or they didn't have an idea of all the different steps, things would tend to take longer or go over budget. So the process we're going to go over today will help your website redesign stay on time, on budget, and produce the results that you want. And it's kind of broken into about 10 major steps. And the 10 major steps are evaluating your current site, planning the new structure and platform, creating wireframes, creating style and design documents, developing content, creating full mock-ups of pages, developing it then, testing it, launching it, and measuring your results. So that is the basic 10-step overview, and we're going to kind of go through all of that today. And there are some prerequisites you should have kind of in mind already, and we don't unfortunately have time to go through all of these things today. But you definitely want to have your communication personas identified. Those are basically sort of documents that outline who your ideal audience is, who are the people your website is meant to serve. You should have your brand and style guide really sort of dialed in already, and your communication style and all that, and have your team and roles set up. It helps to have, not too many cooks in the kitchen. Make sure you have probably ideally one person who is in charge of approving, who kind of has the final word, who can improve things, keep things moving forward. And these other things, personas and your brand and style guide are really helpful too for the whole process. We design and develop and create content with what we call an audience first approach. We always consider the audience that we're trying to communicate to. So the persona and that stuff is really important. So, and if you want more information on what those things look like, what should you have kind of ready before you start down the road of a redesign, you can check out our website. We have this blog with a lot of useful information there. So we're going to kind of go into that first step, evaluating. These are the things you want to do to prepare for your redesign. Major first step, assuming this is redesign, so assuming you have a current site already, is really evaluate your current site. Don't guess. Look at real data and real analytics and see kind of what is working. What is working on your current site, what is not working on your current site. Kind of evaluate that stuff. A big part of that is going to look at your analytics. and looking at Google Search Console, which will show how your website shows up in search. How are people finding you? Most people driving organic search traffic to their site is important. So these are important steps. Doing a UX review, kind of reviewing how do real users use your website? How are they navigating around? Where are they getting stuck? What can they easily find? What they can't find? And of course, doing a very good review of your content. We highly, highly recommend you don't just move all the content as it is from one site to the next, right? That won't really serve your redesign the best. And we're going to talk a lot more about content later. So for analytics, of course, the major things you'll look at is sort of your top pages, how the top entrance pages too, which are the pages people are finding first and entering your site on. If you have custom events or goals set up in analytics, reviewing those, and using analytics to kind of see that user flow, how people go through your site. And I mentioned Search Console too. That's very important. Google Search Console will tell you what are the top keywords people are using to find your site and which pages they're finding. But it will also tell you things like, are certain pages slow? Do you have problems? Do you have UX design problems on certain pages? Do you have mobile issues or problems? Looking at all that stuff to prepare for your redesign is very, very valuable. And the UX review is an important step too, because that really has to do with the design. Google Analytics will show you, how many people visit a certain page, but it won't tell you how they use that page. Are they getting stuck on it? Is there something that's not working right? So what you're looking at now is a tool called Crazy Egg, which we use on pretty much every redesign project. We install this tool on the website, and what that will do is we'll run that tool for a few weeks or months or whatever until it collects enough data to be statistically relevant, and then we'll see how people are using. So what you're using the site. So you can see these colored areas that are an overlay on this site. Those are the clicks. And it's a click, not necessarily even to a link. It's just any click. So this is valuable. Say people aren't visiting a certain area. You have a button and people aren't clicking that button. Maybe it doesn't look enough like a button, or maybe people are clicking on something else on your page, which isn't actually a button at all, but how it's designed, maybe it leads people to think they can click it. These tools can also track how far people scroll down a page. So you can see where people are on a page if they're not getting far enough down. So it's very, very valuable. An additional tool beyond analytics, whether it's this tool, Crazy Egg, or Hotjar. Hotjar is another tool that does this, heat map, scroll map, and actually a lot more. These tools also really divide up the reporting into different views. So you can see a mobile view. On the right here, you can see a desktop view, or you could see a tablet view even. This is very helpful to see how your current design is being interacted with on different types of devices, which is also very important for planning your redesign. So these are kind of ways to evaluate your current site. Another thing to do is to sort of sit back and review your organization's objectives. Okay, so is your mission and service the same since you last redesigned? Do you have any new services, new objectives, a new priority for your organization? Do you have a new service or a tweak to your mission? How are you in the marketplace? Are you going to tweak or change your positioning on how you are in the marketplace and to other competitors or other people? Does the branding that you have now in the design reflect where your brand is currently at, right? Have you rebranded since the last website, or changed colors or logos? And also, have any goals changed? Were the past goals of your website, were those realistic? Did you meet them? Did you not meet them? Are there more things you want people to do on the site? Do you have more conversion opportunities? So kind of reviewing all these things is very useful too before you embark on a redesign. And then a great step, if you can do it, is to collect actual user feedback. It's very important to internally review with decision makers, staff members. Are people calling or emailing and not finding certain information that's on your website, but they can't find it? Are users reporting consistently having the same kinds of issues? If you want to really dive into this kind of stuff, I did mention a tool, Hotjar, which you can put sort of was this page helpful, thumbs up or down. You can put polls and surveys. You can do actual recordings of user sessions where you can see their mouse move around the screen and see how they sort of use the site in a real-time fashion. That's a very powerful tool. This one is more expensive than Crazy Egg, so it's not something we use on every single redesign, but it is a very valuable tool, so check that out. There's also a few different main sort of types of redesigns, so let's go over that kind of briefly and talk about that. I'm going to switch the poll here quick. Thank you for answering the poll. That's very valuable. It helps me guide the discussion. And of course, you can put questions into the Q&A anytime too, and I will answer them. We'll have dedicated Q&A at the end. If I didn't mention that, I'll probably wait to the end of every section to kind of answer the relevant questions, but feel free to put questions in. I'm going to switch this poll here because I've got another one. So types of redesigns, there's a few types. Of course, many people just think of a full redesign as kind of one type, where it's a complete overhaul of the site. You're really kind of starting from scratch, and maybe you keep certain design elements, but it's pretty much a complete overhaul. Typically, people do this when they have updated branding. It's really important to kind of do a half measure on a redesign. If you have, for instance, new logo, new colors, all kinds of new things, a full redesign is really very valuable. And sometimes people need to update a platform. So let's say they're moving from Drupal to WordPress. They're moving from one thing to another, sort of the CMS and the platform. We highly recommend you don't just move over your existing design to a new platform. Now, if you just recently redesigned it and let's say it's working really well for you, then maybe it makes sense to keep it. But it's a lot of work to move platforms. So typically we recommend, if you're going to do that work anyways, do an updated design and kind of update other things too, update the, the content and things, because that can be a lot of work moving platforms. Another type is kind of a partial. Maybe you need to refresh the homepage. You have new priorities. You want to highlight new things, or you want to add a new landing page, or very common is improving navigation. So a partial redesign like this is sort of an incremental improvement. Maybe you have a slightly new logo, or say it's your 25th anniversary. You want to kind of reskin the site for the year of your anniversary. Those are typical things. Maybe you add a new service that you didn't offer before, so you just need to add a new section to the site. Very common is sort of new navigation. These are, what you're seeing here are some wireframe planning things for an overhaul of a navigation on a site where the site's good, it's pretty good, but they wanted to reorganize how people find things in the navigation, and it benefited them a lot. So that's another typical partial redesign, is kind of reviewing one part of the site and tweaking that. Another common thing is sort of expanding the site. And many times, someone who is like expanding the site because maybe they did a redesign and their budget was such that they needed to stage things out. They couldn't do everything they wanted to do at once. So they'll do a basic redesign and then later use more budget to expand it. So maybe you have a new service or a mission, or it's a seasonal or topical thing you want to add, or adding a new resource. This is screenshots from the Children in Nature Network redesign we recently did. A big part of why they wanted to do a redesign was they had a huge new resources section they needed to add. It's super cool. I highly recommend you check out Children in Nature Network website. We just launched that redesign. The resources section is really cool, and it kind of was a big driver in making this redesign because their old site really had no home for it, and they wanted it to be a central part of the new site. I see I just got something in the chat, which is great. If you have any questions, though, please put questions in the Q&A. It's easier to answer in there. So we'll kind of move on to the next stage of the redesign, which is the sort of the structure, the site structure and the platform. It's very, very important to start off with a solid structure. Just like an architect, you wouldn't just start willy-nilly building a house or a building. You want to have a very solid structure and platform that you're moving ahead on. So the first big part typically that we tackle is the sitemap. And a sitemap, this is for your new site. Some people choose to do a sitemap of their existing site. I don't, I personally don't think that's necessarily a required step, but it's definitely important to do a sitemap of your new site. So a sitemap is a visual map of your site. And it's great for designing the user flow, how people will find content and navigate through your site. And it's really a top-down hierarchy. It will have a spot on the sitemap for every single page in the site, typically, and special indicators if links go offsite to third-party platforms. Very important pieces of a certain page may also be put into the sitemap. And then we design a nice key, and you'll see the sitemap legend here, a nice key to help you easily understand what's on that sitemap. And this is a very important step. And you don't want to be all the way down a design or down the road building it and say like, oh, there's no easy way to get to this section of the site, or oh, these three sections are kind of redundant. Let's combine them. You really want to make all these structural important decisions at the sitemap stage. Save you a lot of headaches. The next step is kind of the platform. Once you have your sitemap, what are we going to put this and how are we going to build this? Is it going to be Drupal or some other platform or WordPress? We pretty much stick almost all to WordPress. That's our kind of de facto go-to tool. It's just so great. You would have to have a really, really good reason to kind of not use it. So consider your content management system's requirements. What do you need to be able to do? Do you need to be able to manage a large photo library or resources or downloads or images? Do you have donation and third-party tools that need to be incorporated into the site? And what kind of support and staff are you going to have to maintain it? Unfortunately, sometimes people make these platform decisions. They don't think about long-term maintenance and stuff and hosting. And are you going to have the expertise on staff to manage it? You're going to have to work with a partner to help update things. So consider all of that when you're looking at platforms. Another important part of this planning step is the interactivity. Don't forget about how you're going to build forms and what tools you're going to need to collect user data. What kind of calls to actions are you going to want, and conversion tools are you going to want to offer? A resource library and have people put in their email to be able to download things. Do you want to have pop-ups on your site? How are you going to do that? Are you going to use a third-party tool like this tool here, Sumo, which Health Partners decided to use? Are you going to have an internal one? Who's going to be able to manage that? Are you going to have chat or other tools? So don't forget about planning the interactivity and how that fits into your site. It's very, very important. I'm going to talk about another important step, which is content planning. And the order of these steps is actually very important. So keep that in mind about the order. Content planning we have before design, even, or styling or anything else. It's very nice to have real content before you go into those other stages. Rather than having just fake placeholder stuff, if you have some real content, it really helps with the later steps. So like I said before, don't plan on just copying and pasting content from your old site to your new site. Now, maybe there's certain small sections. Maybe you have a history section or about us, and that content doesn't really need to change. It doesn't change often. Maybe that you can move fairly verbatim. But it's really important to consider your new sitemap, your new design, all of your new things that come along with the redesign, and tweak your content for that. And it's very unlikely that your new structure and new design is just going to work fantastic with your existing content. So copying and pasting is really not encouraged. So you want to kind of take a good inventory of your content assets. You're going to want to look at the pages, also any print content that maybe you have done that's newer than the website. So you can incorporate some of that. Review your blogs, the graphics you currently have, or any photos or videos you have in your collection, and any kind of premium content you have, and pay really special attention to what kind of content is popular and what's really working for you, what's helping you meet your goals, and then maybe consider expanding that, and look at what content's not working, and maybe take a much larger redevelopment step at that. I saw some questions coming in about SEO, and I'm going to address that actually right at the end of this section. Very good question. Another thing that might help is a tool. So there are actually a lot of content management tools out there. You do not want to be using your new website or the CMS as the content sort of management and editorial tool. It's not designed for that. Website content management systems are not designed for lots of editing and collaborative editing. They can do it, but you're much better at using a tool like Gather Content. So this is a Gather Content, a tool that's really great for building and collaborating on your content. And many people actually just choose to use Google, especially if you're a nonprofit. You know, Google's nonprofit program gives you a lot of things like Google Drive and Docs and all these other things basically for free. So uh, the Google Docs is great. You can use it to manage your photos, your written content, video, basically any website asset really you're going to put in the site, you can manage it there, and get everything really edited and tweaked and nice, and finalized before you go to the step of moving it into your new website design. Um, so I talked a little bit about this, but just keep these major things in mind: reusing high performing content and perhaps even expanding it. Say you have a section of your site, it's very, very popular. Most people read that site. Then sort of expanding that and maybe doing a premium content offer around it would be good. Make sure the alignment of your content aligns with the goals, the personas, all of that. And if you do have premium content that's, much older, consider updating that too. Make sure any premium content, file downloads, all of that, if you're radically redesigning your site, make sure the branding in those documents matches with, the new site. So here are some tools to help you with this. One thing is a page brief worksheet, and but you're going to get a follow-up email after this webinar with the on-demand version and all kinds of other resources, and we'll send these worksheets too that are very helpful. The page brief worksheet kind of helps you think about a page and how you're going to develop the content. So you can see right up front we have audience and message. We have a very much audience first approach to this. So your primary message, your secondary message, talking about the values, the actions you want people to take on this page, then also thinking about some of the SEO. We have another worksheet I'll show you that's specific to SEO, actually. But there's a little bit of that in this worksheet too. So we have a question here about, do you have to worry about lost SEO if you do a design total overhaul? You do. That's very important. And I'll talk about that later during kind of the launch and measure process towards the end. But typically what's happens if you do a really big website overhaul, you redesign the whole thing, you do have to pay very special attention to SEO. Otherwise, your website can take a very big dive as far as the traffic to it. And if you've got good ranking in Google now, you have a lot of links coming to your site. You have to make sure you take those links. If the same link isn't going to exist on your new site, you need to redirect them with what's called a 301 redirect. And certain sections maybe you're not carrying over that aren't relevant. You don't want to do that. You do want to make those 404 and not be found on the current site. So there's actually a very large SEO strategy component to redesigns to make sure that when your new site launches, you don't get that big dip in traffic. You almost always will see a small dip, even if you're replacing an old site that doesn't work that well with a really good new site. You'll see a very small dip. But if you do the SEO part right, that's a very temporary thing. And typically, if the redesign is much, much better than the old site, you'll see a sharp uptick in kind of your SEO. The next step in the process is kind of designing the layout. Where are elements going to be on the page? How many different types of layouts you're going to have? We tackle that with what we call wireframes. So wireframes are kind of the framework of your site. We've done the sitemap, so we know the hierarchy of the site, how many pages, where the pages are, how they link, and now we're going to sort of design the layout of the pages. So this is a very fast process. There's really no design involved here. This is purely layout. There's no colors. There's really no graphics. This is a very fast iterative process to prototype. Prototype how your pages are going to be laid out. So I'm actually going to switch the poll here quick before we get too much into the next one. Looks like a lot of you are planning for a redesign. That's great. Perfect timing then. You can use this content to help you with that. So I'll launch another poll here if you'd like to answer that. So the wireframes are a very important step. It's we spend a fair amount of time on it, but it's a very fast iterative process to kind of end up getting to the ideal layout. And not necessarily every single page in your sitemap is going to have a corresponding wireframe. What we're doing is we are wireframing the major sections of your site or the major pages. So we're going to be um, doing the home page, of course, any major landing page or any major section, we're going to be wireframing these. And this is the stage in which that UX review I talked about earlier is incredibly valuable, because you'll be able to see how far people scrolled or what they clicked on, how they interacted. And if you saw specific issues, this is the stage at which you can address those issues and solve them. Um, so this is another valuable tool for the user flow, kind of how people are going to flow through the sections of the homepage or different pages. So this is a very important step, and this is kind of typically what they look like. They may be black and white or kind of shades of blue, but they're typically monochrome. And remember, we talked about content before this. So if you do these steps in the order we're recommending, now you have real content, real refreshed new content to put into your actual wireframe, so you can make sure you don't have too much content in one area or not enough, so that you can balance out content and buttons and white space and links and really create a thoughtful, balanced approach to the website, to how people use the content, use the links, do all that stuff. So it's very valuable step, the wireframing. And for interactivity, we use wireframes to actually plan out some of that interactivity as well. Say you have a map or pop-ups or different things or chat. You can even bring that into the wireframe process. It's important to kind of not overdo the interactivity. Think about that. Um, you may want to plan for having probably 1 to 3 major actions to take on a page. But you don't want to take every single action or CTA or conversion you want users to do and cram them all on every single page. So plan out the interactivity. Don't overdo it. Make sure it's pretty consistent so people know where to click. Make sure, for instance, like your chat button or your contact button doesn't move around. Make sure it's in the same place. And for sure, don't forget about mobile. We don't always do dedicated mobile wireframes or interactivity plans. Sometimes we do. It depends. Typically, we are doing what's called a responsive design. So things are going to collapse in a very predictable way, and the mobile usually works pretty well. But you do need to think about mobile here, especially if you did that UX review and you saw some huge differences between desktop and mobile. Someone answered, is there a place to find sample wireframes? I'm sure there would be. If you just Googled sample website wireframes, you could probably find some. And of course, you'll get a link to the on-demand version of this webinar, and you could always just look at these again. So plan that interactivity. We typically will plan it with wireframes. So here you can see this isn't the whole page, but this is a pop-up that's going to come up. And we have these choices and an option to kind of move on to the next step of this interactivity. So we have a little map here of how we're going to plan that out. We planned out this was a very important area of this nonprofit site. The chat, a very interactive map and lots of buttons and things to click on. So we planned this out really well too. So it's really important for this interactivity to be easy, valuable, useful. We wanted to nail it. So we did the wireframes and planned it out. So we have some more questions about best practice, redundancy of information. In general, the sitemap and the wireframes are the two most important things for planning where that content's going to live. And definitely put content in sections that make sense. So you don't want to necessarily have a giant chunk of content that's important everywhere. If it doesn't make sense to be in these other places, keep it in siloed in places that users will expect that content to be there. You really want to make sure that your website is predictable as people navigate and go to a section called whatever. that section, the content in there makes sense to the user. So we're going to get into now kind of design. This is a very fun step. Um, Sometimes people just skip right to this. They start their website redesign with design, which, as you can see, I've described these other steps. It's very important not to do that. So design is all about kind of planning the look and the feel. So the number one sort of mistake we see, especially if you skip those earlier steps, say you skipped wireframing or you skipped site mapping, the number one problem we see with redesigns is actually over design. It's actually putting way too many design elements into a site and just kind of overdoing it. That actually happens a lot. So the wireframes, now you have your sort of framework and structure. You know where things are going to do, and you can start designing things. You can start figuring out your photos, your colors, other things like that. And the audience first approach applies to design too. Think about what your audience likes, what they expect, what will resonate with them, and build your design around that. A major first step is color. So usually your brand colors are going to be the accents typically. Most of the time, brand colors are much bolder than kind of neutral colors or grayer colors. Typical nonprofit brands can have kind of bold colors. So don't overdo those. Um, that won't work well for many reasons. For accessibility reasons, readability, and all kinds of other things. So typically, the brand colors are going to be accents. And if your brand doesn't have some really good neutral colors, part of your style guide already built in, consider maybe creating some complementary neutral tones you can use based off the brand colors. So a very common question we always get is, what should we make links or buttons? What is going to make people click on the most? And really, it's not a specific color. The most effective thing for a link or a button is actually contrast. It really doesn't matter what color. The contrast is very important, and that it never changes, that it's consistent. If you have buttons in 10 different colors, that's going to confuse people for sure. Another important thing, like I talked a little bit about accessibility, before you settle on some colors, I highly recommend you test them. And this is a tool, WebAIM. If you just go to webaim.org, they have many, many tools for building websites on there. A great tool they have is a font testing tool and a color testing tool where you can plug in the colors you're going to use and see if they will meet the minimum contrast standards, if they'll meet accessibility standards. So that's very important. So we got some more questions about color. So I'll answer those super quick since we're in the color section. And remember, we will have dedicated Q&A at the end. I'll save some time for that. We have a question: if your organization doesn't have an existing color scheme, how do you recommend finding one? Well, actually, I'm going to go into another step just in a minute, which will show some of that thought process. But if you don't have an existing color scheme at all, I would really highly recommend you start at those prerequisite steps I talked about. Build a really good brand style guide. Um, you can hire contractors to help you with that, or work with an agency like us, or even go to one of those design websites where you can kind of hire a designer. But definitely have that first. Don't embark on a huge website redesign process without at least some kind of minimal style guide. So build that guide out, and how to choose colors. Choose them basically audience first is kind of the whole idea, right? Audience first design. Figure out what color resonates with the audience you're trying to communicate with. If you just have no idea at all, or don't have a preference for those colors, brand colors, you know, check out your audience and kind of figure out what's going to really resonate with them. I had a question about color consistency, color over the entire site. Color consistency over the site is pretty important. That's a pretty important thing, especially when it comes to buttons and links. However, you may want to have, say, one very standout thing. Like, let's say you have buttons and links and navigation and colors, and it's all kind of similar. But let's say the main driver of your website is you're trying to get donations. That donation button, that could be in a different color. Say that's on your header, big donate button, or a big contact, or volunteer, or like one main action. To have that stand out and be a different color is probably fine. That could actually help. Recommend changing your logo periodically. That is really a question of, I guess, how is it aged? Really, some logos are kind of timeless. FedEx, IBM, you could think of a lot of major ones, although they do get updated every maybe 20, 30 years. They'll get a slight tweak. So I would say look at, does your logo and just your branding overall in general, does it match your current mission? Does it match your current audience? If it resonates with what you're trying to do right now, it's fine. But if it hasn't, if it's drifted a little bit, if it's a little bit long in the tooth, then an update could be definitely worthwhile. The next thing to consider when you're talking about sort of setting up your style and design stuff is the typography. Typography is actually pretty important. It's very important not only how it looks, but it actually has a big determination on how people use your site. You can use typography to designate buttons or links in kind of one type. You can use it to define a hierarchy, what's a header, what's more detailed content. It's really important, and use those consistently. Um, Usually we say like no more than 3 fonts, and we're not including your logo. Your logo many times can be totally custom or custom font, but really 2 to 3 fonts is what you want to use. And you want to make sure you're using fonts that are going to be widely supported web fonts. So this is a screenshot of Google Fonts. Google Fonts is a great resource. They pretty much are all going to work in the web. And then your designers, they can download the fonts. You can even actually choose in the wireframe stage if you already have your typography figured out. Say you have an existing brand guide, having that real type in the wireframes is kind of nice to see too. So you can kind of see that hierarchy. Um, so Typekit, which is now Adobe Fonts, Google Fonts, those are kind of the two best ones. And if you pick these fonts, your designers doing mockups can use the same fonts, and the web browser will use the same fonts. It will be very consistent and look nice. The imagery, kind of developing imagery is the next step. What kind of imagery are we going to use? The imagery can help really create a more of an emotional connection. And again, think about your audience. Use relatable. Pick relatable imagery that relates to your audience, that will resonate with them, and use original photography whenever possible. So this is just a small chunk of a website. It's not the whole website, but 2 photos there we actually took ourselves, and one of them's a stock image. Um, so if you use your real staff or real people or your real volunteers or whatever, the authenticity will come through. Unfortunately, if you have to use lots and lots of stock photography, you'll kind of start seeing the same photos used over and over again on a lot of sites. So that's kind of a bummer. That's a big stock photography now is very, very cheap and easily accessible, which is good, but you can overdo it. And if you go down the route of maybe using some stock photography, Getty images or whatever, or Adobe images, just make sure for sure that you are browsing the royalty free section, because there's a big difference. Royalty free imagery is going to be some cheap flat price, $10, $20, whatever, or it may be a subscription, $30 a month, and you could download 100 images. That's that royalty free area. Most of those sites also have what's called rights managed, and those photos you could have to pay thousands of dollars to use, because they'll only sell them to you. So don't look at that stuff. Stick to the royalty free if you go down the stock photography route. So this is kind of the last pre sort of full mock-up design step, is kind of creating these style tiles. Not necessarily maybe 100% needed, but very, very, very valuable. This will help you plan out in more fidelity, more depth, how your style you've been planning on is going to translate to the real full website. How are the colors used together? How is the imagery used? Are we using some images as background images, some as foreground images, or how are the colors going to designate different areas of the site? So creating these is really useful, and you can keep them as a reference, use them as a reference to, further the design down the road. A couple more questions actually in this section about kind of fonts and stuff. Can you import fonts into your WordPress? You don't necessarily import them. So say you're using an Adobe font or you're using a Google font. There's actually a special line of code that whoever develops and builds the website, they put this line of code in your site, and that is going to include that font. It's part of what's called your style sheet or your CSS. So that's kind of how these different fonts get into the website. So it's not really, you don't really import files that way. Best practice to incorporate website redesigns with marketing print materials. Yes, there definitely is. And this step we're looking at right now, the style tiles, could be used for both, actually. If you create a really great, robust set of style tiles, you could really, in theory, use those for both print materials and website. You could use them for mobile apps or even actually social media, all kinds of things. The style tiles is really where your fonts, colors, and imagery culminate. So this is actually a great place if you decide to build that out. If we're doing a very robust redesign for a larger client, typically we will develop a PDF document, an entire PDF document that they can keep and reference, and that will be full of these style tiles and different kind of style design ideas, right? And then they can hand that off to their advertising people or their print people or whoever designers they're working with can all work from that. And that's what gets you really consistent feel sort of across your website, social, print, whatever. So now we're into the full mockups, and this is a high fidelity full Photoshop mockup of exactly what a page will look like using the fonts, the right size font, the color, everything, and it's a 1-to-1 pixel exact representation of the site. Of course, it doesn't kind of move and expand like sites do. It's not responsive. It's a flat image, but it's really cool because it gives you the real feel of what the site's going to look like. So typically we don't do every page like that would not be cost effective because this is a labor intensive step. But we'll do the home page for sure. We'll do any major landing page. We may do the contact page or the donation page. We'll do kind of those big important pages. And now we're going to get into kind of how you integrate the content into now your site. So you've created those full mockups, and developers now have taken those mockups and they have turned them into a test site, right? Like a development site in WordPress or whatever, where you're now starting to integrate in the content. You're starting to enter in the content. So remember to continually refer to the strategy, the audience, personas, the page briefs, all that strategy you built in the other steps as you are creating the pages and putting it into your CMS. Make sure you keep referring to that, because the worst thing is when you make a really good plan and then no one ever looks at it again. So make sure you look at it. And as you've gone from that wireframe to the full mockup to the develop site, that you may need to tweak a few things here and there. So keep that in mind, and keep in mind your goals and your SEO. And we had a question about SEO. When you do a redesign, how do you keep your SEO good? There's a lot of technical things about that, about how you launch the site, which we'll talk about. But having a framework and a worksheet for SEO for every single page also is super valuable. So here's another worksheet. This is an on-page SEO worksheet, which is much more robust than just the page brief. If you really wanted to dial in the content, we would typically recommend a page brief and like an SEO brief like this for every page. So this helps you really define your target keywords, target personas, the purpose of the page, so the value proposition, and how the content is going to work into all that. And also, hopefully, you're using a platform like WordPress, and hopefully, one of the awesome SEO plugins like Yoast SEO. And that's another very important step as you're putting that content in there, to just make sure the SEO is dialed in from the get-go. Now we're going to kind of go into testing and launching. It's very important to test your website really well before you launch it. So hopefully you're working with a provider, agency, or staff or whatever, where you can have a development site you can go look and test and go through before you need to launch it, publicly. So our testing approach, we define ahead of time the target browsers. What are the target platforms, browsers? Is mobile super, super important? Tablet view, desktop view, all those different views. We will test the responsiveness of the design. How does it work? We'll test it with multiple mobile devices, and we'll really test the speed and interactivity as well. Google is putting more and more and more emphasis on how well your site performs. So if you have really good content, a competitor has about the same quality content, but their site just functions a lot better. It's much faster. It works better on mobile. Google's typically going to send them more traffic than you. So keep that in mind. A tool that we have access to, not a lot of small nonprofits do, or other people. You may need to work with an agency to get something like this, but we use a tool called Sauce Labs, which actually lets us emulate and launch literally any device you can think of. And what this does is when you run this tool, it boots up a actual virtual device using those exact operating system, browser, screen size, all of those things. So when you had that step way, way early in the process, you looked at your analytics. Part of Google Analytics, it will tell you the average screen size people are using, the devices, all those things. So definitely make sure you test for whatever, the 60, 80, 90% of your users are using. Make sure you test the new design for that. And then another very valuable testing tool. There's a lot of performance testing tools, but here's the most common one. It's free. It's Google Page Speed Insights, and this will give you a speed test for the page. And this is right here. This is a site we redeveloped. This is a super important page on their site. It's the scholarship page. One of the main functions of the website is people go there to find scholarship. So this is a very fast site. It's got a great score, 96. Typically, we say for desktop, you really need to be in the in the green area, hopefully between 85 and 95. For mobile, you get a little more slack on that, but definitely not in the red. You don't want to be testing your pages and be in the red. This tool will give you a big list of things to help improve the speed too, if you don't know why your particular page is slow. We did get another question about redesigns. I'll answer quick here. Someone's asked, realistically, can you improve your site by just changing some things without a complete overhaul? You actually can. Now, that's very variable. If you don't have the budget for a full redesign, which is very common, you can still make some serious progress on your site by doing a partial redesign. The most important factor to figuring out if that's going to be worth it, though, is that first step of really analytics. You could have great content on your site, and this is actually a common thing. If your site's, say, 4 or 5 years old, you may have actually built up a really phenomenal library of content and things your users really want. But if your navigation hasn't been updated along those years as well, just the content, and maybe that people can't find that content. So that's a case where just a major overhaul of your navigation and not everything else could actually have a major benefit towards your site. So it's really those first early steps of analytics and UX review. Those can actually help you determine what kind of redesign you need. Maybe you don't need a full overhaul. Maybe you just need a couple new sections or new navigation. This has come up a couple times, the SEO considerations. It's very, very important to consider SEO when you're doing a redesign. You need to think about all the incoming links to your site. If you have a site that's 10, 15 years old, you have a lot of content, there could be thousands of links out there on other websites coming to your site. And if those pages move to some other area, those links just become dead and you could miss out on that traffic. If you have ads, social links, social profile, paid links out there. So the way to handle that is, of course, doing redirects, what we call a redirect, which is a line of code that's going to tell people when they click that old link, oh, it tells the browser, oh, that's moved, now it's over here. And when you do that, search engines and other places eventually may update their information to go to the new link too. Review your metadata, review your sitemap files. Now, this is different than the sitemap you created. That's a visual representation, like a hierarchy. This is a code. This is XML code sitemap file that hopefully your content management system automatically generates for you. You don't do this by hand. And this file gets sent to places like Google and Bing and other places for them to help when you launch, to help them get up to speed quicker on how your site has changed, so you get less of that dip in your traffic. Um, Someone asked what metadata is. Metadata would be the meta title and meta description of your page. So it's not what the user sees in the browser, but that's what Google sees when they read the code of your website. If you have a good title and good meta description for every single page, there's a good chance Google will take that and use that text in the actual search results of Google. So that lets you control a lot more how you show up in Google. And it's not guaranteed that Google's going to take whatever description you write and use it. They may just take a random chunk of your page. But if you do really good metadata well, there's a much greater chance you can have a lot of control over how you appear in the search engines, not just Google, but all of them. Definitely before you launch the new site, do a really good final edit. That's very important. Just a couple of quick things on launching, and then we can get into Q&A where I can answer a lot more of your questions. Think about the time of the month, the day, the week, the year, all of that. Consider when you relaunch and hopefully pick a time that's a little bit less busy for your organization. Just, in case something happens, you have to tweak things. You don't want to pick like the busiest time to launch your new website. You don't want to launch your new website right in the middle of a conference or in the middle of your donation capital campaign or whatever. I mean, plan the timing out. And also make sure that you launch your site with SSL. Make sure every page is on SSL. Make sure that you have a website system, whoever you host with, make sure the host is set up to make sure SSL is enforced on every page too. These are some more technical things, but make sure whoever is working with you on the redesign, they think about these things. And then it's actually not a really bad idea to do a final backup of your current site. If you don't have any backups at all, that's super bad, but make sure you have some kind of backup. That's very useful because sometimes people do the new website and they realize, oh, we linked to this PDF document and we forgot to move it over and now we can't find it. So just as a safety measure, have a backup. Someone asked a definition of SSL and DNS. So SSL, basically layman's terms, SSL means the page is loaded securely. So in your browser, you see that little lock icon, or it may say this page is secure or whatever. Pretty much everyone is using SSL now. I mean, if you go to a website, I think in most major browsers, and it doesn't have SSL, the browser warns you that the page is not secure. So we recommend your entire website be under SSL. It used to be years ago, it was okay, only the donation page or the checkout page or whatever page where, credit card information had to be exchanged. Now we recommend every single page. That's what Google recommends and all the major companies. DNS stands for domain name system. That is where is the information for your actual name, like www.arkstone.com. And when people put in that name, that links to this computer server right on the internet that actually has your website on it. The DNS system is what connects the name to where it lives, right, physically on the internet. And unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits, they lose the information about who has the ability to change that. And many times when you're redesigning a website, if you're moving hosting or doing something, you will need that DNS information to be able to point your name to the new location. So that's another little technical thing, but you'd be surprised how many times people do a redesign and then they forget that they don't have access to change that. So that's pretty important. I got one last poll tool I'll just switch to just because I'm curious about who has already defined a really good brand style voice guide, because that's actually a very valuable thing for redesigns. A lot of people say they have it, and that's actually typical. Nonprofits typically have that stuff more than the nonprofit world. I'm not sure why. So after you've launched, of course, follow up. Watch for any major issues that happen. Keep an eye on your analytics. If you see your analytics wildly swing one way or the other, that's really important. And of course, gather any feedback. Ask people, how do you like the new site? Did it solve whatever problem you were having before? Kind of the things you want to consider for success, right? Was this redesign a success? Is look at your analytics. Is the traffic going up or down? And you may have a little dip, even if the new site is really awesome. And you do, even if you do every SEO thing perfectly, you may have a small dip in traffic through Google. But the better you pay attention to the SEO and technical things, the smaller that dip will be. It'll be very short term. So look at things like time on site, how many pages are people viewing. So if your website was very hard to use, people couldn't find what they wanted, then maybe the average page viewed per session might have been 2. And now if it's 6, then okay, people are finding these pages easier. It's working better, right? And if you do have goals or conversion goals or custom events, in your analytics, are those going up or down? That's another thing. Just any feedback you get. So that's kind of our process. That's the process for website redesigns that we have been using and following and that we've developed over more than 20 years. And it's worked really, really well. So I can open it now. We can go another 5 or even 10 minutes if needed. If there are more questions, we can open it up. Looks like some questions are coming in. What are the top 5 things to review in Google Analytics to prepare for a redesign? That is a really, really good question. Top 5. For sure, the most popular pages, the top entrance pages. Usually people do come in on your home page first, but you'd be surprised if your home page is really, really lacking and some other section of your website's really great. You may have people not coming to your homepage first. So the entrances, definitely the time on page and time on sites. So if people get to a page on your site and the average person is on it for 5 seconds, then that page doesn't have what they're expecting to have on it, right? They clicked a link or followed a search engine result, and what they didn't expect what they got. So that's a bad sign. Pages per session is very good too. And then I think any conversion goals, any goals you have set up. Hopefully you have some kind of goal or event set up in Google Analytics. If it's contact you, donate, volunteer opportunities, sign up for your newsletter, whatever those are. Hopefully you're tracking those. I would say those are my top 5. Do you recommend obtaining a new Google Analytics code for the redesign? I don't actually. It's really not a good idea to switch analytics from your old site to your new site, because then you would have to look in 2 different places to see if the new site is working better than the old site. You wouldn't be able to compare easily. So for sure, don't do that. And I've actually seen people do that a lot. They kind of take all of their analytics tools and kind of toss them out the window, and then with their redesign. But you definitely don't want to do that. You want to keep your legacy analytics account so you can see, and especially if you can go back really far, you can go back, say you can go back 3 different designs and say, how did the site in the early 2000s compare to the mid 2000s to now, and see if you're going in the right direction or not. Now, you may want to update how Google Analytics works. So Google Analytics and most other tools have gone through like an evolution. So the preferred way now to integrate analytics is probably a lot different than maybe you did 4 or 5 years ago. Now we want to use a tool called Google Tag Manager, and we install Google Tag Manager on your website, and then all other Google tools or analytics tools are installed using that. That is really nice because it's a no editing, no code way of adding other analytics tools and adding like custom tracking to things. Here's a perfect example. Say you have a donate button, and that donate button goes off to like Classy or some other third-party service that leaves your website. By default, if people click that button and leave your site, that is not tracked in Google Analytics by default. You can't see that. You need to use something like Tag Manager to create a custom event that says when people click that button, take that click and put that into Google Analytics. And then you can see with all your page views and other stuff, how many people click that button. Because remember, Google Analytics only tracks when a page loads on your site by default. So if people watch a video or click off to a third-party site, that's not tracked by default in analytics. So we're just about at time here. I want to thank you. Thank you so much for, I know people are getting so sick of Zoom, so sick of webinars. Hopefully we'll have in-person training again as soon as possible. I used to host 4-hour training sessions at our office where we can really dig into topics. And so these webinars are just sort of an adaptation of that. I'd love to see everyone in person again soon. I can hang on for a couple more minutes if we have more questions. Otherwise, you are going to get a follow-up email. Look for that email. That's going to have a lot more resources in it, some downloads for you. It's going to have actually a link to this. You can rewatch it as many times as you want. You don't have to register again. And keep in mind on that arcstone.com/events page, many more ones. And next month coming up very soon, accessibility. And that webinar, I'm co-hosting with another person. We're going to have 2 accessibility experts on, and it's going to be great. If you're curious about, accessibility, how to make your website accessible, you don't want to miss that webinar. I think you'll be able to register for that next week. So thank you again so much for your time. I hope everyone has a great week, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.